Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Prodigal Son. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first off, let's talk about this week's case. It involves this dude named Gavin who was killed in the most brutal way, in the sense that he was stabbed 100 times. Some of the stabs were deep, some of them were shallow, and just kind of one of those Adrisa moments that I really appreciate is the fact is that, Malcolm's doing his thing, and she's just under her breath, she's saying, God, you're so great. And it's just like, I think it was like that, or it was like, God, or you're so good, or something like that. It's just like little things like that. I'm just like, oh, she's a super fan of, like, I guess him, and just the way his brain works and the way he's able to kind of figure stuff out. But I even love, like, he was talking about the fact is of, like, oh yeah, this, like, kind of breaking down what he believes this to be, like a sadist and all that. And you have JT being like, could you say that with a little more, like, in your voice, about just like, oh yeah, like not saying it so creepily a little bit. I also love the fact that he's like, later on, like, on average it takes, and that was kind of like a disturbing fact, like 3 stabs at 4 inches is enough to kill a person. And JT's like, where the hell you get stats like that from? And didn't get an answer to that. Malcolm just went right past it. So, but basically it turns into this, obviously, it's like, okay, so trying to figure out who's the one behind all of this. First and foremost, obviously his wife Crystal, which they were going through a divorce, and then there's everything, like, it's also about their son Isaac, because Malcolm discerns that Crystal has essentially I forgot what the actual name of it is, but he was saying it's basically the maternal version of an Oedipus complex, which I kind of had an immediate response, like, of JT being like, oh, does that mean there's something? It's like, oh no, typically it doesn't ever really go to that extreme. It just becomes like, what you represent to that person is they put you on the same level as a life partner, of like, oh, they need you, that you fill this role in their life like a life partner, without the whole, crossing the line like an Oedipus complex situation would. And I think the case has some very nice developments, in the sense that obviously it's like they follow Crystal and she's digging up the evidence, so it's all pointing towards her, which obviously confuses Malcolm, because it's like, no, it doesn't fit the profile, but she confesses and everything, so it kind of throws him off. It kills her a little bit, because for him, he made a promise to Isaac. It's like, Isaac's now losing his second parent. I told him that everything was going to be okay, but it turns out it's not going to be okay. And the fact is, he feels bad, like, and that's actually something his therapist Gabrielle had brought up. I thought was kind of interesting, because typically, because of the way his mind works, because of him being a great profiler, he does tend to look at things on a more bleak and pessimistic side. That's kind of what allows him to kind of get inside of people's heads, seeing the worst in people. But when it comes to Isaac, it's like, oh, you were hopeful, you saw a little, you were trying to be more optimistic. You were trying to see the brighter side of things, which obviously it's ironic with the name Bright, which I guess that's the whole irony behind it too, is like his name is Bright, being the fact is that he does, because it is, hey, he's bright because he's smart, but also at the same time it's ironic because of the fact is that he is he delves so to the dark parts of people's minds as well as own. So, which you could also make some argument about his name being Bright. The fact is he shines a light on the darkness in his own mind over the course of the series so far. So there's too many different levels you can take that. I didn't even think about that till now. Regardless, but Malcolm realizes, like, wait, the fact of the matter is that I'm seeing things this way might be the fact is I saw what I wanted to see, in a sense that, like, because I'm biased when it comes to this kid, because obviously when he looks at Isaac, he's seeing a bit of himself, and so I'm kind of doing a little bit of projection and projecting myself onto him. And because I am willing to I'm creating this blind spot that I'm seeing Isaac one way, because I'm trying to be hopeful and not treating him like I'm not viewing him the same way I would anyone else as a profiler. And so because of that, he ended up missing a lot. I love they circle back to that statement. It's like, oh, what's wrong? How are you? And it's like, how are they? Talking about his rabbits. It's like, oh, they lost their dad today. At the time, I was thinking like, oh, it's him. He's a kid, so he's projecting up what happened to him onto the rabbit. So it's like, oh, they lost their dad. Obviously, it's supposed to be him. I immediately took it as that as well. But it's like, there's a different connotation to it. Could we find another cage? And it's like, oh no, it meant literally because he killed the rabbit, he literally killed their dad. So it's like, Oh, so it's like, yep, he kills animals. So that's a very Dexter level thing of like, that's usually kind of like the signs. And because that's the whole point of this whole thing is like, a sadist is someone who enjoys pain. I actually kind of skipped over it because obviously everything was kind of pointing to Jake, which Jake is a bit of a sadist because it's like Malcolm was like, oh yeah, the moment you actually kind of liked causing me a little pain. Also, I guess Malcolm wasn't BSing when he probably talked about, oh, the fact is all those martial arts and stuff like that. Because the fact is he ended up hitting Jake at one point, but that pissed him off. He needed to push him into a corner to kind of make him go like, oh no, I'm going to turn into a turn into his real self to kind of reveal like, oh, it's like, oh, like your skin, what was it, like his skin as well as like his eyes getting dilated, like he was kind of into it, which even like he kind of backs away from because Malcolm kind of starts smiling at him. He's like, whoa, what's your thing? And it's like, whoa, are you some freak or something? He's like, well, someone would probably go as far as calling me a masochist, which I wouldn't like, but part of me thinks like, oh, you seemed a little masochistic in that moment where he was kind of causing you pain. But to be fair, I think that's just because he's like, I pegged you as a sadist and turns out you totally are, so I kind of nailed it on it. So I think it's more on that part, but who's to say there isn't a little bit of that masochistic side to the whole situation. But regardless, but kind of circling back to the case, it's actually interesting because these circumstances do fit, Malcolm's profile that she is his mother who is like, she isn't a sadist, she just cares about her son, he's her everything. So obviously that he's her everything kind of made it seem like, oh no, it kind of fit the fact is that she's not your typical like sadist, that she'd be, like I said, the maternal version of an Oedipus complex and a sadist. It just wouldn't happen, Because I guess in a sense it kind of contradicts itself that you'd be that much into causing pain while also loving and holding someone so cherished to you like that they become your everything. That I guess like you kind of almost get your satisfaction. I think it's like almost my way of thinking of it was kind of like you get your satisfaction from having this person be your everything. Like causing pain, you wouldn't get off to, you wouldn't like it, you wouldn't enjoy it, So regardless of the whole situation, but it turns out like, yeah, his mom was protecting, which I kind of figured as much, just the way she was just kind of like, yeah, I did. I was like, yeah, there was definitely something to it. So, and obviously like, because it turns out that Isaac's kind of been like this for a while. What set this all in motion is his dad saw him trying to smother one of his rabbits. So his dad was like, I'm going to take him to a psychiatric hospital so he can be, looked after. But that meant like, oh, I'm going to be taken away from my mom. And just that means that people are always going, it's like, because, Isaac ends up talking to Malcolm later on, and for him it's like he spent most of his life kind of not being understood. Like obviously he's a kid, so he doesn't 100% understand himself, but the way he's feeling and stuff like that, so it's like no one understands me. So he knows like being sent to a hospital, whatever that means, he's gonna be taken away forever from his mom and everything, which Malcolm's like, I understand where you're coming from, because it's like when my dad was taken away from me, like I felt such big emotions, as you're a kid, so you don't know how to 100% process it, so it made him kind of shut down to the point he kind of didn't want to feel anything either, kind of similar to Isaac. So it's a thing of like, but with help from like friends as well as doctors, I was able, look at me now. Like you're worried that like it's like, oh, I'll always be broken. But Malcolm's like, no, look at me. Which you could make an argument like, yeah, you're not kind of the best example to look at that. Which you're well adjusted after, despite everything that's happened. You've led a good, decent and normal enough life, but I think at the same time with your current circumstances where it seems like this whole situation where your dad's kind of got you spiraling a bit, you can make the argument that you are still broken. So you can almost make the argument that he is kind of still lying to Isaac of like, oh, look at me, everything's going to be okay, when in actuality there's always, maybe you're not going to be fully broken, but you're never going to be 100% right. And especially in Isaac's case, because like I said, it just seems like he's always kind of been like this since he was younger. But the fact is that he is willing to take the chance to get better. I even like that, Gil is trying to give Malcolm the chance to kind of reach out to Isaac, because even for him it's like, despite what's happened, it's like, despite what he's done, it's like he's a kid. So and Gil, as we know, because of his relationship with Malcolm, like obviously he's very protective of kids. He kind of took Malcolm under his wing and looked after him. It was almost interesting too, because when you saw Malcolm give Isaac the candy, it was very reminiscent of him and his dad to an extent. So that was kind of an interesting development. But it seems like when it's all said and done, though, he is Isaac is going to get the help he needs, and obviously his mom is going to be there every step of the way. So I thought, there's it's still kind of, and even Malcolm's going to visit him, so it's like to show him like, hey, you're not alone. Like the fact of the matter is, buddy, me, someone who understands you, will be there with you every step of the way too. So I thought that was kind of a nice silver line, because I think in some shape or form, being around Isaac could potentially help Malcolm figure out some stuff figure himself out to a certain extent. Maybe he even talks about the fact is that he does worry because of everything that he went through. He could have ended up like Isaac, but then you have Gil being like, not on my watch, which immediately made my brain thinks, because obviously connecting everything, because obviously he had Danny look into the station wagon, and she ends up finding it, and he goes there and there's blood in the bat, which my mind immediately goes like, the fact is he made that statement of like, oh, I could have ended up like Isaac, makes me think that his dad might have pushed him to kill somebody. Like it wasn't his dad was positioning him to, so it's like, oh, what did you do? Why can't you remember? It's because he either he was pushed into it, or maybe whatever the case may be, whether it was something that his dad like pushed his hand into, like say like, oh, he had a knife on someone, his dad pushed his hand and forced him to kill somebody, kind of gave him a helping hand. Maybe he was taking those steps forward, but then, maybe he took a step back at the last second and his dad did the killing, and just his brain, trying to process all of it kind of hit all of it. Because that's something Gabrielle had talked about was the fact is that like basically kind of making the analogy of his psyche basically being like a castle made of on top of sand. That the fact of the matter is, you go digging, like if these memories end up being true, you're pulling at some walls that your mind is built up, and start pulling at that string, those walls will break down and you'll start having essentially a psychotic break. We see glimpses of that this episode, because it's like, oh, you'll start seeing stuff that's not there, and then it starts making you question, like, because you will no longer be able to tell, well, what's real and what's fake. And so we see that a little bit because he sees his dad, and it's just like, so that, and I think that in itself is going to beg the question going forward. That means everything that Malcolm sees going forward potentially could be something you have to put into question, obviously, which I never really thought about it too much until people started pointing it out, like after I'd seen the movie. It was the Joker. Like, I know a lot of people I guess I didn't read into it. I was thinking like, right, he's not really the best narrator to kind of see the story through, just because he's an unreliable narrator. So the same thing kind of implies in this, like going forward, we're seeing things through Malcolm's eyes, but it's probably not going to be obvious what's real and what's fake. Maybe in some instances, yes, but others, no. It might blend so much that you won't be able to distinguish the two. It's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening, in that regard. Because like I said, that was my thought before of like, maybe Malcolm killed someone and that's what that's all about, or maybe he had witnessed it first. I don't know. Maybe the lady from the trunk, the chest, is that person from the back of the wagon. So maybe that's what that's about. So like I said, maybe that's not his dad's victim. Maybe that was his first and only victim. And now begs into the question of like, if Malcolm finds out that he was a killer, or maybe that's something his dad's trying to make him think like, oh, you were the killer, when in actuality you didn't, but it's just a position, Malcolm in a position to be closer to him. I don't know. His dad's got this, Martin's got this messed up way of trying to draw his children back in. And the question is, like, for what purpose? Like, what is this whole thing with Malcolm? Is it just trying to get to know them? Or is there more to it in the sense that are you trying to position them to be more like you, or willing to, does the same thing apply to Jessica, or is it just your kids? Because Malcolm hasn't visited him in a while now, so, but it doesn't seem like he's stressing about it as much just because of the Ainsley and Jessica situation, but we'll get to that soon enough. Obviously, we kind of go back a little bit, rewind a little bit, and it's like seeing Martin so happy to see Ainsley, and it's like, oh yeah, the fact of the matter is, yeah, I missed out so much on their life and everything. And obviously she's going forward with this interview, and it's like, oh, why did you kill all those people and stuff like this and that. It's like, no, that's not the real question you want to ask. Are you brave enough to ask a question that's really burning in your desire to know? And this is actually something that even Malcolm and Jessica are kind of shocked about. They both agree about keeping Ainsley as far away from Martin as they can. She even does it, like, goes to her Ainsley's boss's boss to basically make it so that Ainsley's like interview gets shut down. But because the thing is, Ainsley, for her, it's like she's trying to fill some hole in herself. She had talked about that before. There's a part of herself that's missing because it's like, you guys have basically told me who Dad was. I never got to know him. It's like, because we're trying to protect you from him, but at the same time, it's like, but you got this skewed view of him. Let me see firsthand what that's all about so I can get some answers. And it's like, you expected to see some monster, is kind of what Jessica says. We're like, what did your dad say to you exactly? And she explains, and it's like, wait, so you were expecting her to go there to see some monster or something, but what you found was a father who loves you, because he told the stories of like, no, the fact of the matter is, it's because she was like, her burning desired question was any of it real? Did you ever really love us? And it's like, I did. All I've ever done since I've been arrested is envision the life of like what your life could have been, you know, what I could have been a part of your life, and just these little steps of the way, missing your birthdays, missing this, your accomplishments, everything that you went through. You being a debutante. I was never a debutante. I was like, really? That's sad. And it's like, for him, it's like that life that, you know, him being there in Ainsley's life throughout all these different moments, whether they just be fantasized stuff that he made up of like, oh, this be the perfect world, that's all he's had to hold on to. And for him, that is so real. And so he wants an opportunity to have a relationship with Ainsley. And that's the thing of Jessica was like, you love him. And Ainsley's like, no, what? No, I don't. It's like, yeah, you thought you were going to find a monster, but you found a loving father. And that's I guess, the almost, you know, Red Riding Hood level type of thing of, you know, oh, here's the big bad wolf dressed as Granny. You know, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, because it's like, oh, you know. And I think that's what makes him even more dangerous, is that he can be this like, oh, I'm not a monster. Look at me. I'm a loving father. But I think because she's letting it slip her mind because he is the way he is. Because it's also that complicated thing of like, despite what they did, that's still your family. And I think that's something you can apply to real life too. It's like when someone in your family does something atrocious, is there always going to be a part of you that wants to love them? Because I think there's something there. Because even I think even Jessica and Malcolm definitely share that, where it's like there is a little bit of that pull of like, I want to, you know, I still love you, because it's kind of like the same thing with like Crystal and her, you know, Isaac. It's like, despite what he's done, that's still her son. Obviously she loves and cares about him and would do anything for him, you know. I mean, hence why she was willing to kind of, you know, take the fall for him when it came to Gavin's murder. So it's kind of a similar thing. And I don't know. Ainsley is saying, like, you know, Mom, you raised a powerful, strong woman, so I can do this interview, you know, without kind of, you know, getting swayed by Dad or whatever. I can do this, which she's like, maybe you can, which is like, that's going to open up a whole can of worms, so that's going to be a very interesting situation. I even love the fact is that, in their group sessions, Martin's talking about, he's like, oh, I'll get to know my daughter now. And it's like, no, that kind of doesn't pertain to the conversation we're having. We're talking about triggers to kind of basically like your you know, what kind of triggers your anger, essentially. He's like, no, I'm getting to that, because now he feels a little complicated, because yes, there's a side of him that wants to have a relationship with his daughter, but at the same time it means doing this very public interview. And it's like, oh, and then so it turns into a question of like, well, why don't you want to do the interview? He's like, well, you know, it's also, you know, this and that, but it's also because, you know, the camera does add 10 pounds supposedly, because for him it's like, I don't know, he doesn't, it's, you know, he's a very private person in a sense, like my stories would kind of be public knowledge to everyone, and I just kind of want to keep it to myself. But the dude during the session is kind of like, well, what if it's more so because you're usually in control, and putting your story out there, this interview will kind of take some of that control away from you? Is that what this is kind of about? But then there was someone else in the meeting, the dude who had basically killed his parents. He's like, I should have put my story out there. You need to let your story be told. He started getting more and more agitated. He's getting dragged away. And I love Malcolm so calmly being like, I think we started seeing some of his agitation or anger come out. So it's like just the cadence in which he speaks, and just kind of like how casual it is, I think just kind of makes him like I bring it up. There's a bit of a like dark humor in that, but also at the same time, I think that shows you how scary he is, that he can be so joking, so charismatic, yet be the monster that he is, having killed all the people that he has, you know. So it's definitely going to be an interesting situation when Ainsley does do this interview, and you know what ends up coming about it, you know, all the stuff that Malcolm's stumbling across, what that means about him, what it means about his father. These are definitely going to be some interesting developments, you know, we find ourselves looking into going forward into this next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.